I've been sitting with this case for 3 months. Not the plumber, not the specific sting. The man running the operation, the one holding the clipboard, standing just off camera, asking questions in that measured, unhurried voice like a priest who already knows what you confessed. The first time I saw the footage, I wasn't watching for the predator. I was watching him. There's a specific moment, and I keep coming back to it, where Chris Hansen sets down a glass of lemonade on a kitchen counter and waits. The house is staged. The camera crew is hidden behind a two-way partition. A man is walking up the driveway who believes he's meeting a 14-year-old girl. And Hansen just waits, completely still, the way a trap is still. The plumber arrives. He's carrying something. He sits down, and before he can speak, Hansen walks out of the hallway, notepad in hand, and says, "Why don't you have a seat?" That line became a meme, a cultural artifact, a shorthand for justice served in a satisfying camera-ready package. But I kept asking a different question. One I couldn't shake. Who exactly was that moment you for? The record shows Chris Hansen built his career at NBC News as a legitimate investigative reporter and journalist. He covered corporate fraud. He worked international stories. By most accounts, he was disciplined, patient, and good at the work. That part matters because what comes later only makes sense if you understand he wasn't a reckless man. According to available records, around 2004, NBC approached Hansen about a partnership with an online watchdog group called Perverted Justice. The premise was straightforward. If unprecedented for network television, adult decoys posed as minors in online chat rooms, engaged men who initiated sexual conversation, and invited those men to a house where Hansen and a camera crew were waiting. No minor was ever present. The conversations were logged. The confrontations were filmed. The segment aired as part of Dateline NBC. It worked. I pulled several of the original broadcast transcripts. When I first read them, I thought I understood what happened here. A journalist found a story and told it. But these weren't stories in the traditional sense. They were events that Hansen's presence created. The house, the decoy, the camera. Without NBC, that encounter doesn't happen. Which means Hansen wasn't documenting predatory behavior. He was producing it, in the theatrical sense, arranging the conditions under which it could be observed. That distinction haunted me the further I went in. The segment became To Catch a Predator, one of the most watched true crime franchises in American television history. Between 2004 and 2007, the show staged operations across the United States, resulting in hundreds of confrontations. Law enforcement waited outside to make arrests afterward. The ratings justified everything. For a while. Then came the part of the story that doesn't get memed. I've read the production records and news archives around To Catch a Predator. More times than I can count. Something still doesn't add up. Not about whether the men were guilty, but about the architecture of the entire operation, the ethics of it, the legality of it. These questions surfaced at the time, mostly from defense attorneys and civil liberties advocates, and they were largely drowned out by the audience satisfaction of watching a man in a polo shirt get ambushed in a suburban kitchen. Let me walk you through what I found. The first thing you notice, reviewing the actual chat logs that Perverted Justice published, is how the conversations were conducted. Reports suggest that adult decoys sometimes initiated exchanges or kept them alive when the subject tried to disengage. Defense attorneys called this entrapment. prosecutors disagreed, and courts at the time largely sided with the prosecution. But legally permissible and ethically clean are different ledgers. The second thing you notice is the relationship between the show and law enforcement. In most operations, local police departments agreed to participate before the sting began, meaning law enforcement signed off on the method. A television network acting as the front end of a criminal investigation. Officers would arrest subjects after Hansen finished his confrontation on camera. The footage would air. The case would proceed. Those 3 steps all happened in that order. One detail stands out across everything I've reviewed. In 2006, in a Texas operation, a district attorney named Bill Conradt engaged in online conversations with a decoy. Conradt refused to come to the house. He didn't walk into the trap. So NBC and local law enforcement went to him. A camera crew accompanied officers to his residence. When police moved to arrest him, Conradt shot himself. He was never confronted by Hansen. He never appeared on camera. And he died because the operation came to him instead. I called the court records office multiple times trying to access documentation from the civil suit filed by his family. No one picked up either time. Eventually, I found archived reporting that indicated NBC reached a settlement with the family, terms undisclosed. The show was canceled shortly after, around 2007 or 2008. The official reason? Shifting network priorities. That's where I hit the first wall, because shifting network priorities is the kind of phrase that means something else entirely. After the cancellation, Hansen didn't stop. He couldn't. That's the word I keep landing on. Couldn't. He launched independent stings funded through YouTube and Patreon under a revived To Catch a Predator adjacent brand. The production values dropped. The oversight dropped with them. No network standards department. No legal team on retainer. What did you get then? A man, a camera, and an absolute certainty that what he was doing was righteous. The operations he ran in this later period, roughly 2017 onward, operate in grayer zones than anything NBC produced. In some cases, decoys presented themselves as younger. In some cases, the operations crossed state lines, which creates documented questions about jurisdiction and admissible evidence. Defense attorneys argued in multiple cases that Hansen's involvement poisoned prosecutions. Some cases were dismissed, some weren't. I've reviewed footage from his independent operations that aired online. I want to be precise about what I observed, because I'm not interested in conclusions that outrun the evidence. What I saw was a man who had refined the performance of certainty into something close to a reflex. Hansen walks into a room and the camera finds him. He sits across from a subject and the air changes. He has mastered the rhythm of the confrontation the way a musician masters a piece they've played 10,000 times. Every pause, every eyebrow raise, every long silence before the clipboard comes up. The question I couldn't answer was whether that mastery was in service of the truth or in service of him. There's also the period when Hansen's personal life became the subject of legal and financial scrutiny. Court records describe complaints involving unpaid fees running into thousands of dollars. His marriage ended. The man who had built a career exposing men acting as though certain rules didn't apply was, by multiple accounts, acting as though certain rules didn't apply to him either. I'm not telling you that to be cruel. I'm telling you because the parallel is the story. That detail makes the question harder to dismiss. what are you really doing this for, Chris? I thought I had the shape of this story. A journalist finds a cause, builds a franchise, loses the institutional structure that kept him calibrated, and continues operating on conviction alone. It's not a villain story. It's not a hero story. It's a story about what happens when a person becomes synonymous with a mission. And then I found something that reframed it. In reviewing the legal aftermath of several to catch a predator prosecutions, not the confrontations themselves, but the court cases, I found a consistent pattern in how judges and defense attorneys described the evidentiary role of the footage. The video of Hansen's confrontation was, in many cases, considered inadmissible or supplementary as direct criminal evidence. A private entity produced it. The chain of custody for the chat logs ran through perverted justice, not law enforcement. What Hansen filmed was, in many cases, legally ornamental. The arrests happened because of what occurred after the camera stopped. The footage was for the audience. The footage was always for the audience. I keep coming back to that, because if the legal mechanism was the police and the social mechanism was the camera, then what Hansen built wasn't a justice system. It was a mirror, a way for an audience to watch guilt confirmed in real time, to see a man's face when he realizes what he's walked into, to feel the satisfaction of that moment, safe, at home, through a screen. Nobody I spoke to, not researchers, not journalists who covered the show's early years, could explain why that satisfaction felt so clean, why a process with such documented legal complications produced such uncomplicated public approval. And I think the answer, the one I can't fully prove but cannot ignore, is that Hansen understood something about audiences that no one wanted to say plainly. He understood that people don't need justice. They need to witness something that looks like it. I've been over this 100 times. Here's where I land. Chris Hansen is not a fraud. The men he confronted were, in the overwhelming majority of cases, men who traveled to meet what they believed was a minor. That is not ambiguous. That is not entrapment in any meaningful moral sense, regardless of the legal arguments. Whatever complications exist in his methods, the subjects of those confrontations were not innocent bystanders caught in a poorly designed net. They were men making deliberate choices. That part I'll say clearly. But what the evidence also shows, and I won't soften this, is that the format of to catch a predator shaped criminal justice processes in ways that were never fully examined at the time. When a television network becomes a partner in law enforcement, the incentives of those two institutions do not align. Law enforcement needs clean evidence and careful procedure. Television needs drama and resolution. The 2006 Texas case is the most extreme illustration of that misalignment. A man is dead, and part of the reason he's dead is that a camera crew needed a conclusion. I can't prove Hansen made that specific call. Reports indicate the decision to approach the residence involved coordination between the production and law enforcement. But the precise sequence of authority, who pushed for the confrontation, has never been publicly established with clarity. What I can say is that no one was held fully accountable. The show was cancelled. The settlement was sealed. And Hansen moved on to the next operation. The later period, the independent work, the online platform, the Patreon-funded stings, represents something different in kind. Without network oversight, Hansen operates on personal conviction. Personal conviction is the most dangerous tool an investigator can carry. It makes you certain when certainty is a liability. One detail stands out in his online-era operations that I can't dismiss. In several documented cases, subjects confronted in these independent stings had their footage circulate online before any law enforcement contact. If that sequencing is what it appears to be, the confrontation isn't a step in a legal process. It's the product itself. The arrest is optional. The humiliation is mandatory. I can't prove his intent, but I can describe what the structure produces. Here's the question I keep asking. If the footage is the point and the prosecution is secondary, then what exactly is Chris Hansen protecting? The children who were never in the house? The community who watches the confrontation on YouTube? Or something smaller and harder to name? The feeling that someone is watching and the monsters know it. I'm not saying that feeling is worthless. I'm saying it's not justice. And the distance between those two things is where I've spent the last 3 months. I keep coming back to that first image. The kitchen, the staged house, the glass of lemonade on the counter that nobody actually poured for a guest. I drove out to one of the locations used in a later era operation. I won't say which one. A normal street, modest houses, grass that needs cutting. Nothing to indicate what happened there. Nothing to indicate that a camera crew once stood in a back bedroom, waiting for the right moment to step forward. The house looked like any other house. That's the part I can't resolve. Whatever you think of Chris Hansen, and I've tried to be honest about what I think, the problem he was working on is real. The men in those chat logs are real. The harm they intended is real. And the institutions that were supposed to address that harm were, in many documented cases, too slow, too under-resourced, or simply not watching. Hansen was watching. He built a career out of watching. And somewhere in that career, watching and performing and documenting all became the same thing. I don't know at what point the mission became the identity, or whether Chris Hansen could tell you himself. What I know is that the house is empty now. The camera crews are gone. The confrontations live on YouTube, rewatched by people who feel something watching them. Relief, maybe, or proximity to justice, or just the satisfaction of watching a door close on something that deserved to be contained. I don't know if that feeling is enough. I'm not sure anyone does. The question I'll carry out of this one, the one I can't set down, is simpler than everything I've laid out here. Simpler than entrapment law or network incentives or the cost of personal conviction unchecked. Was he catching them for the children or for the camera? Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe the answer changes depending on which year you're asking about and which version of Chris Hansen walked through that door. I don't have the answer. I'm not sure the record does either. I'll keep reading.